I could tell you that you should switch to LUMIX because Sony is absolute 100% grade A trash. Today is an interesting day, seeing that Sony has just announced the Sony FX-2, and it is interesting because all of the Sony D-bag fanboys are crying, and all of the LUMIX fanboys are ejaculating out of their 2-inch dingling all over their studios because to them, LUMIX has won this 2025 battle of who is better at circle jerking their fans. So with that being said, me as a well-known Sony D-bag fanboy with a massive following of 32,500 subscribers, which is basically nothing. But I have an opinion, and my original opinion on this matter was going to be me completely shitting on the Sony FX-2 right now. And I had planned on doing this video way earlier, but because I already saw like the specs and, you know, the sensor and all that stuff via like rumors online. But the one thing the rumors got wrong was the pricing. And when I realized that it was only going to be $2,700 without the 32-bit float audio thing, I can't really shit on it as hard because I think it is somewhat fairly priced for what it offers, and that the target audience is not me. I am someone who has been in it. I've been, you know, filmmaking, whatever you want to call it, for over 10 years. I do corporate work, wedding work, documentary, and of course, YouTube D-bag content. So I'm already established. I already have a bunch of cameras. This seems to be a camera that has been designed and marketed towards noobs, like dudes who are just getting into the, you know, videography, trying to do some filmmaking action, maybe trying to work on sets, familiarizing them with a quote unquote cine camera. And, you know, in that case, the FX2 seems to fill that void, right? But as other established filmmakers, videographers, fanboys of whatever camera brand watch these things, and in this particular season, it's LUMIX and Sony fanboys watching these things, people are just walking around measuring their dicks. And to be honest, seeing how LUMIX and Sony fanboys cry in YouTube comments, it's not much of a measuring contest. Like, there's not much to measure. Like, we're talking about the difference between a few millimeters in a battle of who has more than 2 centimeters. And coming from an Asian dude, that's pretty pathetic, to be honest with you. So, stupid 12-year-old jokes aside, when you want to talk about like spec wars, you know, feature wars and all that stuff, you know, who's doing like bigger things in terms of filmmaking, Panasonic, LUMIX, whatever the hell you guys call that shit, is wrecking Sony right now, okay? And then yesterday on Threads and IG, follow me on those platforms as well if you want more stupid, useless content. I posted this because Sony posted, "Your journey starts here." And it was just like this image, this shadowy image of the FX2 saying that, you know, May 28, 2025, whatever. I took that, I messed around with it. I said that your journey switching to LUMIX starts here. Because last week I said the Sony FX2 is going to be more influential in getting Sony users to switch to the LUMIX S12 than the S12 launch was, right? Because if you are a Sony D-bag trash, you know, you've been on the, you know, you have a body or two and you're looking to upgrade, you know, maybe you have FX-30 you've been using for a couple of years, creating your trash content, and like, you know, a couple of D-bag Sigma lenses, and you're like trying to upgrade and you're thinking about going FX-3, and then you see like the LUMIX S12 sitting there, just released, and all your favorite tube douchers out there shilling the shit out of it. You're like, oh, I think I want to switch to the LUMIX S12 instead. But let's wait to see what Sony does. And then Sony releases a trash A7 IV in like an FX3, FX30 body with a 2-inch Asian penis sticking out for you to poke your eyes out with. So that's what that is. And I don't care. Look, I know Some people love that viewfinder stuff. Fantastic, right? Maybe it's just me. I didn't start doing this until 2014, but that's saying something because by the time I started doing this in 2014, that kind of viewfinder shit was already like out the door. Like no one was doing that. So it is people who was filming, people who were using camcorders and filming like back in the days, probably pre 2010, which Sony is trying to bring back, which is freaking ridiculous because I don't know how much that little 2-inch appendage cost them to produce and put onto the camera. And then they have a shitty ass screen still on it. Why couldn't they just spend those funds, spend that R&D on that stupid appendage and then just put all of that money into a really good screen, Instead of having a shitty screen and like this freaking, skin flap sticking out at the top of your camera and actually extends it out like this far, because the reason why I like this cinema body is because of how small it is. It doesn't have the freaking viewfinder, so it cuts off. It fits very well in messenger bags, smaller backpacks, and enabling you some additional space to be able to fit other stuff, like an additional lens, maybe a microphone or something like that. But with that extra bulge, you might have to like turn your camera sideways like this or something on your bag. And next thing you know, you're going to lose space for, I don't know, your drone remote, a V-mount battery or something like that. So including that little viewfinder completely eliminates the whole idea of this compact body, right? And then 2, you have to pay for it if you want it, whether you want it there or not. Let me ask you this. Would you rather have that and a shit ass screen? Or would you rather have just a beast ass screen? Maybe something like what Blackmagic has on their cameras, right? And on top of that, I don't know what these hinges costs and stuff like that, but I'm assuming even with Chinese tariffs and all that stuff, instead of costing 25 cents, those little hinges probably cost like 50 cents. So instead of giving like the FX2 the same screen as the A7, the A1 to the A7 R5, the one that not only turns but also like flips out like this, they gave it the same screen as this FX3 right here. The Sony FX2 without like the audio thing again is like $2,700, okay? And that little screen, whatever hinge, is probably cost Sony 50 cents. I would gladly pay $50 more, like $27.50 for that screen. All right. And, this goes back to just Sony doing Sony shit. Okay. Sony is a big brand. It's a big company. And I'm going to reiterate this again. It's a big brand. Okay. And brands are good at what? Brands are good at marketing. I'm not going to sit here and discuss like the specs and what it could do. Everything it could do has already been covered for the past 3 years since the A7 IV came out. It's the same damn shit. It does the same exact stuff the A7 IV does. Little features here and there, AI autofocus, as if Sony's previous autofocus without AI was horrible or something. Right now I'm filming with a Sony FX-3 instead of my ZV-1 because I need my ZV-1 here for a specific reason. The autofocus is not going to leave my face. It's stuck, whatever. It's a 5-year-old autofocus system. It's fantastic. So yes, AI is better, but of course it's not needed. And then, the A7 IV right now is a photography camera. It's $2,500. And in my opinion, the little extra knickknacks and all this crap that's added into the FX2 is well worth the additional $300 to get it to like 27. I'm going to repeat this again for all you LUMIX fanboys before you go, you start crying to your mom. Oh, Vu went on YouTube, said he doesn't like LUMIX. He doesn't want to switch to it.
You need to switch to Panasonic F1R Mark II for open gay.
Why would I want to switch to Panasonic to be openly gay? First of all, why does my opinion matter so much to you? And then second of all, I'm not even hating on the damn camera. Like, all because I'm not going to switch to it doesn't mean I don't like it and I don't like what LUMIX is doing. I think because I clown on you all, you automatically think I'm also clowning your camera. It is not. I am not clowning on Lumix as a brand or the camera. I am clowning on Lumix fanboys because you all are emotional. You all care too much about having your camera choice affirmed by unimportant YouTube douchebag trash like myself. If you bought your camera and you're happy with it, great. Okay? And I completely support you in that choice. You know, you got a good camera system. You have plenty of lenses to use. Even though Sony has a better ecosystem, you have plenty of lenses to use. You could just use all the Sigma lenses, all those Sigma L mount, aka loser mount lenses. Just use that, you know, and you're perfectly fine. There's plenty of lenses for you, right? And what I just said there is probably what's going to make you think that I'm hating on Lumix because I called it loser mount. Because I'm being sarcastic. I'm messing with you. Okay, I'm trolling you, and you're letting me do that, and then because of that, suddenly you have this bias thinking that I'm trashing your camera or whatever. Really, I'm just trashing you because you all are like, someone had commented that the only reason my channel exists because, you know, I make these videos trashing Lumix. Okay, fine. Let's say that's true, right? But if that was the case, the reason why I do it, y'all keep watching, engaging in it, and subscribing to me based on those videos. So I'm going to keep doing it, right? Because clearly it's giving me growth. However, the reason why I do this is because I have an opinion of someone who has been doing this for 10 plus years, has been through the gauntlet of Sony cameras used in a professional environment, even though there's cameras that I probably should not have been using in a professional environment, like a Sony Nex 6 back in 2014 that is known to have overheating issues, that is known to have like rolling shot or whatever it was. You know, I'm here to give advice. I'm here to help you make a purchase decision because unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that doesn't have critical thinking abilities. They don't like thinking for themselves. They need other people to think for them. They don't like to go out and try things for themselves. They need people to spoon feed them how to do things. They don't like to search for information themselves. They need people to spoon feed them information. That is why YouTube reviews and stuff are great. That is why people buy $300, $400, $500 filmmaking courses.
Award-winning.
Because they need it fed to them. They can't search for it themselves. That's why people in the comment section always ask dumb questions and actually wait for them to be answered by me or other tube douchers out there instead of doing a Google search and finding it within 2 seconds, you know? Like, oh, does it shoot 4K? Dude, like, does the Blackmagic Cinema 4K shoot 4K? First of all, it's in the title. Second of all, if you really need to know, just Google it real quick. Why are you asking me and then waiting me a week to reply to you? So, I mean, that's not a real question, but I'm saying like that is how bad the question looks like. Panasonic, so back to what I was trying to say, you know, if I could even remember, Panasonic is not great at marketing, okay? And in a lot of ways, this is what I respect about Lumix because they just create a beast-ass camera and they say, here is our camera. This is what it could do. Do what the hell you want with it, okay? You want to be a content creator with it? Have at it. You want to shoot photos with it? Have at it. You want to film on set? Have at it. You want to shoot anamorphic using OpenGate to get more, to make use of more of your sensor? Have at it. Do whatever you want. This is the Lumix S1 Mark II. It is for you to use. Do what you want with it. Sony is successful as a company and a brand because they try to box users into sections, right? And they make cameras specifically for each section. You know, like this is for this, this is for this. If you're doing this, you should buy this camera. If you're doing this, you buy this camera. Versus Lumix is like, hey, look, guys, if you could be a content creator, you could be an OnlyFans creator, you could be a D-bag, you could be a creeper trying to zoom into your neighbor's house with your camera. You could be a tube doucher. You just need high resolution with a macro lens so you could, find your penis because clearly you don't have one. Do whatever you want with whatever camera. Sony is trying to box you into a hole. So it's like, here's cinema line. If you're looking into shooting on set and shooting cinema, you want to use cameras on the cinema line. If you want to be a vlogger D-bag, walking around, holding the camera out like the piece of shit that you are, you want to use a Sony ZV camera. Z stands for the last letter in the alphabet. V stands for vlog. The reason why it's Z, because you are a loser, which, the bottom of the barrel letter in the alphabet, the 26th ranked individual on the planet. And then V, you vlog with that camera, right? And then anything else that's just like A7, that's for people who do photography, who will probably be replaced by AI when you're filming a wedding and they're yelling, yes, in your ear for 8 hours straight. That's what the 7 series is for. And then, you want high res, you get the R, you want S, you get it because, for sensitivity, even though the Panasonic LUMIX S12 has better mid-range usable low light than your trash, supposedly large 12 megapixels are capable of. So I'm telling you this right now, the Sony FX-2, and back to the Sony FX-2, they're branding this for you new cinema D-bags that want to get into filmmaking and start working on sets. You got to use all this crap. If you all been, those of you who's watching my content know that a lot of times I mock, when people say they're professional or when people advertise that they're award-winning on their website or something like that. Whereas, that's why in those skits that I do with that obnoxious Asian guy.
If you want to be professional, if you want to be award-winning.
And then from that, that's where my shirts are coming from. I just recently created, quote unquote, merch to shill myself instead of shilling brands. I could shill myself. So if you're interested in supporting my channel and what I do here, you just buy a shirt from the links in the description or whatever. And the 2 shirts designs I have right now, one says award-winning on it and one says professional. And these mock exactly what Sony is doing here. They're just labels, You could say you're award-winning all you want. You could say you're professional all you want. You could say that you have a professional camera and someone else has a vlogging camera. But to me, the tools doesn't make the professional. It's the production, it's the person using the camera is what makes the tool professional. I've seen dudes try to win arguments about something. There's, it's a debate about what camera is better. And the other person's like, hey, I'm an award-winning filmmaker. This is my opinion on this. As if that's supposed to make their opinion more valuable. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit if you've been to film school or you won an award or whatever. Buying a camera that says cinema line doesn't all of a sudden make you a cinematic filmmaker or something like that. This is complete bullshit, right? But the vast majority of people that I've seen that uses Sony FX-3, Sony FX-30 and stuff like that, use it as if they're just filming with the Sony a7S III, which means they're using flex ISO. They're not even using Cine EI. Cine EI basically gives you the capability of switching from the 2 base ISOs with 1 switch. So on the Sony a7S III, so on the Sony FX-3, the base ISO is 800 and 12,800. So when you click the ISO button, it literally jumps from 800 to 12,800. And you can't even use anything in between. You can't use other ISO values. I'm not going to say and pretend I know what its use is for on set. But for me as a running gun shooter, and I'm walking around, I'm trying to film, and I got to switch between the 2 cleanest ISOs, 800 and 12,800. It's great that I could be outside, I'd be 800, and I have to step inside. All of a sudden, I could just press a button, it goes 12,800 really quick. I make some adjustments to my ND, and I'm set. versus having to press ISO and then scrolling through all the ISO values to get to 12,800, especially on the Sony FX-3, because everything between 800 and 12,800 is completely useless, right? So in this case, you have FX2, which a newer base ISO of 4,000 compared to the A7 IV 3200. I'm not going to get into all that. Basically, you have that. You're able to switch through it. Now, and of course, there's other cinema features like, the screws and all that stuff. It's funny too, because the vast majority of people I've seen shoot on FX30, FX3 rigs out their camera with cages anyway. So what happens is like those screws lose their value because you could put a cage on any camera that doesn't, so that's another thing. But I really appreciate the overall like square form factor without this bulge. But basically what I'm saying is they're aiming this camera at beginners. Although I see the $2,700 as a good price for what it's offering, it's still too expensive for a beginner. When I was starting off trying to learn how to film, I spent like $500-600 on a body, which is like again, Sony NX6. And then the other thing is Sony is just trying to get rid of additional sensors they have. They probably have a bunch of these 33 megapixel cameras that they've been using in A7 IV, A7C Mark II, and this camera just gives an opportunity to sell more of these sensors that they probably have like extras of. Seeing that it's already like 3 or 4 years later since the A7 IV was released, I would think that Sony would have better processing and everything by this time, that it would help the rolling shutter, that it will help maybe get 4K 60 full frame. And I don't know if Sony understands this or not, but if they were able to get this 33 megapixel to be able to allow you to shoot 6K or 7K, whatever 33 megapixels is, but also do 4K 60 full frame. And even if it could do only 120 in crop or, 124K at all, they could have easily sold the FX2 for $3,500 and it'll be well worth it, right? If it was able to do 6, 7K, full sensor readout and 4K 60 full frame. And this is just all processing. And I don't know if the sensor is limited or whatever, but seeing what LUMIX was able to do with the old A7 III sensor in the S12E, seems like the processor does help with that, in one way or the other. Now, if Sony can't do it, I doubt it. They're just not trying to put it in there because, again, they are trying to separate all of their stuff. Because, again, going back to consumers, people can't think for themselves. So me, I got ASD level 1, I got ADHD, right? All I do when there's nothing going on in my life, which is never, but my whole 24 hours of my existence, even when I'm sleeping, I'm thinking about random shit. Some of the random shit is cameras and what they can be used for. And when I look at the new Sony FX-2, and it's designed for beginners to start filmmaking, to start being cinematic or whatever, buying a cinema line, I would tell those beginners to ignore the branding on these cameras and look at the cameras not based on how it's named, but what it provides, and then look at the pricing and then figure this shit out from that. But I am here to help you with that, okay? So, before LUMIX fanboys say you should buy LUMIX and all that stuff, the only LUMIX camera, in my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, okay, is really intriguing to me, seeing that it is competing against all these other cameras, Sony and all that. As of right now today, it is the S1 Mark II, and that is strictly for filmmaking. I think it's obviously still behind A7 IV in photography, and I'm going to talk about the S5 II because it doesn't do 4K 60 full frame, autofocus is whatever, man. Like, no matter how you look at it, S5, the S1 II is the better camera when you compare it to the FX2 for video, okay? is also $600 more expensive than FX2. So for another $700, you would expect to get some more video features, but however, you lose like the photography ability. And even the FX2, they retained all the photography ability of the A7 IV. So, from the looks of it, depending on like your use, if you're more photography, videography, whatever, the FX2 could be seen as a better value because of 33 megapixels and overall better autofocus and all that stuff. If you're just comparing Sony cameras to each other, if you look at the Sony ZV-1, essentially, if you had a budget, if your budget as a beginner videographer at $3,000, which is extremely high, and you're looking at two cameras, and if you're looking at the camera to buy and you see the FX2, the Sony ZV-1, sometimes on sale, could be as cheap as $1,800. It could be $2,000. It could also be $2,200, or you might be able to find it used for even cheaper than that. And you look at an FX2, and the FX2 is, at the very least, $500 more expensive. And then you buy the FX2, you also need a lens. Same thing with the Sony ZV-1. You buy the Sony ZV-1, you have a lens and a body, okay? And in my opinion, and in the opinion of most other filmmaker tests out there, the FX3 and the A7S III, which means the Sony ZV-1 as well, because they share the same exact sensor, maybe a little bit slight differences in noise reduction here and there by like half a stop. People say, in those objective, like scientific tests, the Sony, this video in the ZV-1 is better than the A7 IV and FX2 sensor. So you get better image quality, you get 4K 60 full frame, you get 120 frames per second, basically full frame at only 1.1 crop, whereas the FX2 doesn't even have, 1080 4K, don't even have 4K 120. And then you factor in buying a lens, and it's still likely going to be cheaper depending on the lens you buy. Say you buy like the 24 millimeter f1.8 that I'm using to film this video right now. That's a $329 lens. It's still going to be cheaper than the FX2 body. But then you say, well, Vu, you miss out on dual card slots, and I guess the ability to use CF Express Type A or B, whatever card. And to be able to use 4K up to 120 frames per second, you actually only need a V60 SD XC card. And a lot of people don't know this, and they end up buying like a expensive ass CF Express card with like no storage. You could film 120 frames per second 4K with just an SD XC V60, which could cost as low as $42 on Amazon when it's on sale, and it's normally only $49 from Sobrent, which I have been using for a lot of my professional client work and YouTube stuff, and it's been working fine. And then you're going to say, well, you lose dual card slots, you might get your card corrupted. Okay, that is true. And also, I have told you that I've been doing this for over 10 years, and I've had my cards corrupt one time. And it wasn't even on actual client sheet. It was actually me doing YouTube, and I was sitting there deleting crap, and then trying to film, trying to make space to film like another 5 minutes. And then one way or the other, I corrupted the card. And guess what? I use this program called Ease US, not sponsored. I'm just telling you what I use. Ease US, and I recovered everything on that card. Okay. And then another time, an SSD, not even like an SD card, but like an SSD that I use to store files to edit it with, that thing got corrupted. In my opinion, really badly. I used Ease US, and it recovered that card. So in the rare occurrence that you do get a card corrupted, for some reason your camera starts not running to read it and you're scared that you lost some shit, just take that card out, put it back in your bag, label it, whatever, put another card in, and continue with your work. And when you get home, you take that SD card, and I'm pretty sure Ease US will recover it. So then your redundancy, whatever, ends up being not big of a deal if you understand how all these things work, okay? So the chances of your card getting corrupted is very slim. $2,200, cheaper than the FX-2, better image quality, 4K 60, full frame, 120, full frame, AI autofocus, small body. If you're a beginner, you should just get a Sony ZV-1. You know, and just to prove the point, like, I used this the other day on a corporate shoot. I purposely, knowing that I've been using this camera as like a YouTube cam and like a CD cam for like my client shoots already, I knew that it lasts. And, you know, you could also argue again, the FX2 has a fan. And if you're just using the Sony ZV-1 as like a B-roll camera shooting 4K 60 everywhere, you know, 10, 20-second clips throughout like 8-hour, like quote unquote wedding day, it's not going to overheat. If you're using it as a stationary camera like this for 30, 45 minutes, whatever, I've never had it overheat on me. I got an overheat warning one time when I had it sitting on like the dash of my car when I was like vlogging and driving at the same time, and like the heat was going through the windows on it. Got a heat warning. And that's it. Okay. So if you're saying, hey, the FX2 has a fan, it's more reliable, I argue the Sony ZV-1 is also reliable, especially if it's like just a 30-minute shoot. But if you're going to go over an hour, you buy an external fan. Could cost anywhere between $30 to $50, still cheaper than the FX2. And then the fan simply just clips on like this. It's battery powered, or you can just plug a USB-C power into it, so you don't need this at all, and it would just keep running it. And a lot of you guys are like, well, this is really bulky, Vu, like it's sticking out like this. Like I said, when you're shooting 4K 60 and everything, just walk around doing B-rolls, you don't need this. Just put it in your bag. This is really only useful for like sitting on a tripod for long duration, 4K 24, whatever, talking head videos. This doesn't really matter if it's bulky or not. It's just sitting on a tripod anyway. Camera's rigged out. If you're worried the fan is going to run out of battery or whatever, of course, you're sitting on a tripod. You're probably going to have like a rig like I would have with like a V-mount on it. So like when I was on this shoot, I just used this thing. It's like I got a little plate from Tilta that allows you to, it has like a hinge, you know, it has like a little tilting hinge, whatever. I have a quick release system. I just stick this on here like this. So now I have my monitor, and then I put a V-mount battery on it like so. So now I'm going to use this V-mount to power my Sony ZV-1, to power my monitor, and power my fan, and it'll go probably like for like 5 hours straight, nonstop, with a simple rig as this. And then for some reason, if it's one of those shoots where you stop doing, now you got to do B-rolls or whatever, and you don't need this anymore, you could either leave it on, you can, because it's actually a very nice handheld rig too. You got a lens here, but you can just also just take it right off. And now your camera is back to the handheld, tiny Sony ZV-1 travel camera that you know and love. Cheaper and a lot more capable than your FX2. But a lot of you would completely dismiss the Sony ZV-1 because it didn't say cinema line on it, because Sony didn't brand it a certain way and you bought into it, you know. So that's my opinion on FX2. If for some reason you really need to have a penis sticking into your eye, then get the FX2. Other than that, I already have an A7 IV. That's, you know, a camera that I use just in case I need to do photography, then the rare occurrence that a client needs that from me. But it's usually just like it's like a C cam, you know, for like multi-angle shoots. So like the shoot that we went on to do yesterday, I would usually use an A7 IV in that environment. But I just wanted to prove a point to myself and to whoever is interested that the Sony ZV-1 is perfectly suitable for client corporate shoots in a professional environment. I decided to put a Sony ZV-1 there. I use Sony ZV-1, FX-3, FX-30 for 3 angles, and well over an hour, talking head, Sony ZV-1 was completely fine. Not even a hint of overheating. Matter of fact, it was still cool to the touch because the fan was on there. Like, don't buy into that stuff, you know. Like, if there's one thing I hate, it's labels. You know, labels, you know, that limits people at what they do. Because for like a while, even for me, let's say people like, you see me doing YouTube, they might label me a YouTuber, or they see that I film most of my client work, like 80% of it is wedding films. And they label me as just like a wedding video guy, like a wedding filmmaker guy, even though I could do like everything else. Same thing with these cameras, like in many ways, like my values in terms of like how I am in life and, professionally, whatever, LUMIX aligns with that just based on how they market their stuff, which is pretty much, hey, look, this is what we could do. Go do whatever you want with it. Whereas Sony, they really try to like get people to buy into like one type of camera based on a label. Like I have FX-30 APSC, like I buy like a ZV-10 II or A6700 and do the same exact stuff. Same thing, same sensor. As a person fully invested in the Sony system, lenses and all that stuff, it's just, it's just easier for me, like every time I sit there and I get disappointed because, Sony hasn't released a new camera, and then I go on a shoot like the one I did yesterday and I get like the results I get out of the Sony camera. I'm like, it just makes me realize like I really don't need any other camera right now. Like my ZV-1 FX-3 FX-30 is working perfectly fine for me. So in that regard, I'm not sitting here disappointed and crying as a Sony user because they didn't release some new Sony FX-3 Mark II or whatever like that. But another side of me is disappointed seeing that Sony, in my opinion, Sony's kind of wasting their time making like these nonsense cameras with branding. And unfortunately, people are going to buy it, when it's just kind of like a lackluster sideways release, and it makes me, as a Sony user, like thinking in the future, like maybe a year from now or something, I want to like upgrade to 6K or whatever, seeing that instead of like focusing on that, they're wasting resources just that sell more 33 megapixel sensors that they have too much of or something. Just don't get tricked into marketing and all that stuff. Video on the A7 IV is only good for talking head stuff like this, like I'm doing right now. Run and gun shooting, walking around doing documentaries and stuff. It's not a full frame camera. It is a Super 35 camera. So if you're going to be doing any run and gun shooting, you're probably going to want to be using 4K 60. If you want to use 4K 24, you're going to have to put that in APS-C mode so that the sensor readout is faster. So it doesn't have that roll and shutter. That will help with IBIS, because a lot of times IBIS on Sony looks bad on those older cameras because there's so much roll and shutter that every time you walk and there's a little bit of bounce, that shutter will start warping along with IBIS and all that stuff, making it look really bad. So you're buying the FX2, you're going to have to look into just buying like APS-C lenses if you're going to be like running gun shooting. But it's great in a sense where it does have a higher resolution sensor. So if you're going to want to use dynamic active stabilization, which is punches in 1.3 times into the sensor, at least you know that you're getting like full pixels out of that, 1.3 times crop, and you're getting really good stabilization. Whereas the ZV-1 has dynamic active stabilization, crops in 1.3 times, but it's only a 12 megapixel sensor. And we know, doing math, 12 megapixels, multiplied into 1.3 times, you're not going to be able to get a full 4K amount of pixels cropping into the ZV-1 sensor 1.3 times. It's kind of a, high key bullshit release. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really affect me. Just want to share my opinion on it, and hopefully I helped you make a camera purchase decision, camera switching decision. Until next time, lighten up.
Hey man, what lens is that?
I'm working on a review for this 7 Artisans 24mm f1.8 lens for Sony E-mount.
Oh my god, Sony is trash. You need to switch to LUMIX F1 Mark II right away.
Bro, I'm not about to switch to a different camera system for perceived upgrades that I'm actually not going to make use of.
LUMIX have open gate.
I might make use of that once a year.
It have the best IBIS.
Sony IBIS in the A7S3 and FX3 is actually very underrated, and the newer cameras, the IBIS is vastly improved.
It do 6K.
This video right now playing on everyone's phones is 720p.
It will have R-Log C, much more cinematic.
S-Log 3 is also used in cinema, so
It has better dynamic range.
That dynamic range is quite nice, but even that is not enough for me to sell 4 of my Sony camera bodies, over 20 lenses, for the next 2 months dealing with lowballers on Marketplace just to switch to a different camera system. And then a month later, some new camera comes out with 8K, 120 frames per second, freaking 69 stops of dynamic range, eye big, in-body image gimbalization. And then what am I gonna do? Switch again? I'm not sponsored by Storyblocks, Squarespace, Artlist. Ain't no one got money to be on gas like that.
What you mean, that?
Gear acquisition syndrome.
You don't need to sell all that, you just buy.
What are you talking about?
Let me show you. Use the paybook card at B&S. Asian love this card because you don't have to pay tax.
My guy, it sounds like you have a different kind of gas.
Sign up for my how to switch camera master.
Bro, my bad, you don't got gas, you got straight liquid coming out of your ass.